songs that we are playing this morning are traditional Irish songs. They're played on harp, fiddle, flute, whatever instruments are handy. And they're really beautiful songs. The first one is called Carrickfergus. The second one is called In a Star.
Before we introduce our hymns, please stand and join to sing our Gloria.
Our first scripture reading is 2 Kings 4:42 through 44. A man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing food from the first fruits to the man of God, 20 loaves of barley and fresh ears of grain in his sack. Elisha said, "Give it to the people and let them eat." But his servant said, "How can I set this before 100 people?" So he repeated, "Give it to the people and let them eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left." He set it before them. They ate and had some left, according to the word of the Lord.
And our psalm this morning is Psalm 145, verses 10 through 18. All your works shall give thanks to you, O Lord, and all your faithful shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power, to make known to all people your mighty deeds and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. The Lord is faithful in all his words and gracious in all his deeds. The Lord upholds all who are falling and raises up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food in due season. You open your hand, satisfying the desire of every living thing. The Lord is just in all his ways and kind in all his doings. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth.
Our gospel reading for today is John 6, 1 through 15. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up to the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now, the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. And when he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for Jesus himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon, Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" "Make the people sit down," said Jesus. Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into this world." So my first question for you is, are you hearing me okay? Okay. Can I turn myself down a little bit because I'm getting a little bit of feedback? Sound good? Okay, fantastic. The second thing I want to say is welcome to Bethel, where circuits blow and we forget music, and where the screen is washed out because the contrast is off. So welcome to a very human church. So, the passage that I'm working with today, the feeding of the 5,000, this is a very popular one, isn't it? I don't know if you can read that, but it's pretty funny. I'm going to go ahead and say this. The feeding of the 5,000 miracle is probably the most popular one out there. It's the one that just about everyone knows. This is the one that is usually used to explain exactly what a miracle is. And if you're wondering why I think that, just Google it and read about it. And it'll tell you exactly that. It'll say, this is a miracle. This is how you should see a miracle. The amazing power and unbelievable accomplishments of Jesus. At several points in the Gospel of John, including in the passage directly following the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus is referred to as the bread of life. It's calling on a direct imagery between his flesh and bread. So if we look at what John is stating about Jesus and his feeding of the 5,000, then it would make sense to view Jesus as the actual bread which fed the multitude. And do you think the leftover bushels numbering 12 is just a coincidence? Not at all. Because who's left over after Jesus has left? The 12 apostles. The imagery is bread because Jesus is the bread of life. He is the bread passed amongst the 5,000 and their families, and which sustained them all. And it's sort of the lens through which we must look when we interpret the feeding miracle. But here's the kicker. If Jesus, his teachings, and his acts are the absolute bread of life, the substance which sustains and informs our own actions, then what are we saying when we call this story a miracle? I've always been taught that what makes a miracle is the impossibility which defines it. That a miracle is not a miracle unless it cannot be explained through natural means. And you know what I think about that definition? I think it's a load of crap. Most people, even though they might know the biological process, the anatomy of the process, the step-by-step, they still think childbirth is a miracle, don't they? I certainly do. By making this supernatural assumption of miracle, we feed a dualized reality. It's either this or that. It's either good or bad. Either natural or supernatural. It's either that which we perceive to be reality or a miracle. So by calling this feeding of the 5,000 a miracle, I think we automatically push it into the realm of the unbelievable, a story which is outside of the realized world of our own existence. Most of Jesus' miracles should be unbelievable, because they are. They should inspire disbelief, requiring us to have faith, these amazing healings, these risings from the dead. These are miracles that are just amazing, and they inspire faith. But I think this story, this feeding of the 5,000, is different. When it comes down to it, the story offered to us by John is very short, and it seems to leave a great deal open to interpretation. And yet we tell this story with such confidence that it seems like we've closed the book on the whole matter. Even when we combine John's version with those of the other three Gospels, we still end up with an incomplete story. I fear that the Christian trend has been to fill in the blanks so that the miracle itself becomes impossible to explain. And the easiest way to do this is to equate the story of the 5,000 with every other miracle which Jesus has performed. The story that I grew up with, the one that I'm sure you heard when I read it, is one where at every step the event seems to become more and more unbelievable because we were taught to look at it that way. What I'm saying is that this story deserves a rethink and possibly a retelling. Because this one stands out. It's different from the others, and that's why we keep getting drawn to it. That's why we keep telling it. That's why it's our poster child for miracle. I think I'm right in saying that this feeding of the 5,000 is the only event where Jesus does something unbelievable in the presence of and for such a huge number of people. This didn't just affect a blind man, a woman with bleeding, or a girl lying in her bed at death's door. This affected 5,000 people and their families, all at once. When it comes down to it, there's a great deal in this story which we don't know, but we have every right to infer. But we must only infer that which we as humans can confirm. Because to do otherwise would be to speak of things that we simply don't understand. There's only one major assumption which I think needs addressing. It's that we would think that 5,000 working class families left their homes without a single bit of food. I think is a stretch of the imagination. Maybe there were some people too poor or too sick to have their own food and to make the journey. We know from versions of the story that Jesus spent a great deal of time healing. So it is plausible to think that some did not have food with them. But the fact of the matter is that these people knew where they were going, and those who could do so certainly prepared for it. There are three basic human needs which have transcended time: water, food, and sleep. There's no way 5,000 families ignored a single one of those. Don't try and argue that everyone ate their food before they got there because some random kid had 5 whole loaves and 2 fish. Okay? That tells me that the child and his family had brought enough bread to feed at least their small group. If we accept that these people were at least human, with some level of awareness in what they were doing, then we must also assume that there was more than 5 loaves and 2 fish floating around the 5,000. But I would also say that that food wasn't going very far. Let me ask you. You, your spouse, your family, leave your homes with no clue when you're going to return. You must carry all that you can to survive. So you gather food. Probably because there isn't McDonald's in the desert. If you had done this, if you had gathered all that you could, all the food that you had, knowing that you weren't going to come home anytime soon, that you were going to have to survive on what you had with you, would you be advertising what you have saved to survive? Even if it risked your family's health? We know there were people there who probably didn't have any food. You're surrounded by people who are begging and sick, the undesirables, the ones who couldn't afford it for themselves or couldn't prepare it for themselves. You're surrounded by that group of people. And when the strange men came walking around calling out for food, these apostles, would you have spoken up if it meant that your family was going to starve? How mad would you have been if your son had spoken up and said, hey, I've got 5 loaves and 2 fish? So if we take those assumptions, what does that tell us about Jesus? It kind of diminishes power, or how we want to perceive power. It kind of takes away from Jesus, doesn't it? I don't think so, because what happens next? John says that he told the people to sit, and then he immediately broke the bread and spread it around. In Matthew and Mark, it also says that he had them sit in groups of about 50. What's the difference? Ask yourself this. You and your hidden food could never feed 5,000. But maybe it could be stretched to 50. Better yet, maybe a couple other families think the same. Maybe they saved food too. Maybe they thought, well, I could give a little. You pull out that extra loaf or 2, and then so does the family sitting across from you. Then another and another. Then not only are you eating your fill, but so is everyone, including the men and the women who had no food to begin with. And this is happening all over the place. It was triggered by the first person to give, which was the boy. Did Jesus split the bread and pass it out amongst the apostles and say, go ahead and eat first? Not that we know of. He broke the bread and sent it out to the multitudes, just 5 loaves. Now there's 13 men who are giving away the very food which was given to them by that boy. Then who do you think the last people to sit down and eat were? The apostles. It was the last people to sit down, the apostles. And they were the ones who were taking the food in the first place. All of a sudden, there's a spirit of generosity floating around. People start to think to themselves, maybe I could give a little. And all of a sudden, everyone's full. And Jesus sends the apostles back out again and says, gather up what's left. And all of a sudden, there's 12 bushels full of bread left over. That sort of thing can spark a fire. According to John 6:6, Jesus knew exactly what sort of fire would erupt. He knew the hearts of his people. He knew them so well that when the multitudes realized their mistake, they would change their minds. Who better to lead a multitude such as this than the man who inspired such generosity? The one who also healed. The one who could so easily change the world. I think perhaps what John is getting at with this whole bread imagery is that if Jesus is the bread which sustains the people of God, such sustenance cannot be contained or hidden away. It must be shared. Perhaps when you are called upon to present your bread of faith alone amongst the multitudes, you may naturally feel the need to hide it away for safekeeping. Where if only you opened your eyes to the will of God, the one that we see lived by this man named Jesus, maybe you'll glimpse a faith swelled by the multitudes around you. then if you simply give a little, maybe others will too. You need only share the bread which you hide. And then there will be bread in abundance left over. For that's the promise of Jesus. His teachings of love and compassion promise exactly that. Ladies and gentlemen, the story which I've given you, the version that I've given you, is in no way a miracle according to my first definition. Because all of a sudden, the impossibility of one single assumption was brought into question. But the results and the outcome of the events have remained the same. All of a sudden, what we've seen is no longer a miracle of impossibility, but a miraculous realization of possibility. So there it is, the feeding of the 5,000. I doubt it was the version of the gospel the writers meant to tell. Maybe it was. Maybe it's not even close to the real story. But maybe it was the version that always deserved to be told. Please join me in prayer. Great loving Spirit, Mother of compassion, help fill our hearts with inspiration, with boldness, and with confidence to speak up, to give out, to take action even though no one else around us is. Give us the power to change our minds, because if we simply change our minds, perhaps we can change the world. We ask you to be with us today. We ask you to dwell among us. We're here to worship. We're here to love. We're here to give. Thank you so much for your compassion and your time with us. In your name we pray.